welcome back. It's another worm episode this week. Again, just been maintaining the bins for the last couple of weeks. This is my regular tote bin that was recently restarted about a month ago now. And I'm showing the lid of the bin because I have a couple of worm friends that are hanging out on the bin, as well as a worm that's up on the walls. I make note of this because the worms typically begin to climb the walls if something is going on with the material. It could be too wet, it could be too acidic, there might have been pests that moved in that are pushing the worms out. So I do pay attention as to whether I see worm tracks at all around the bin. And as I begin to move the mixture around, I am noticing that it is damper than what I like for it to be. It's getting to the point where it is almost muddy towards the bottom. Not that I have any standing water issues, but just the material itself is much more damp than I prefer it to be. So that piece right there wasn't a worm ball, it was actually a clump of the material, to get an idea of what I meant. But looking at the worms themselves, they're still moving around, still looking good in the bin. Since it was just 3 of them that I found, it doesn't indicate that there is a big issue with the material. So I will be changing how I approach feeding this bin for this week. So since the moisture is mostly towards the bottom of the bin and not in throughout the material, I am going to add some shredded cardboard right underneath the food and a little bit of grit so that any of the liquid that comes from the frozen food that I'm putting in the bin can be absorbed into this cardboard. I'm not going to put cardboard anywhere else on the bin at this time, and I am not going to spray the bin either to add any more moisture. Just trying to make sure that as much moisture can evaporate. That is one of the things about these bins that is very hard to do, is to keep it in that drier state than in a wetter state, because it's very hard for the material to dry out and water to evaporate, especially since I don't put any additional holes in the bins themselves. Moving over to the second regular tote, on this one there was only one worm that was crawling, and that's in the lower right hand corner. There was one that looks like it was moving around, but there did seem to be evidence of movement because there were a lot of worm trails along the sides. So once I opened this bin, I kind of knew that I might find the same situation as the sister tote bin, and that was the case. I did see that it was much wetter, and this bin was wetter in my opinion than the previous bin. So they are starting to hold on to moisture again, which I do want to try to make sure that they don't get too wet, because they are prone to the wetness. And as you can see here, that just is mushy. Even though it's some worms, it's mushy and it doesn't break apart, so you can get an idea of the level of wetness in the bin. So this bin, I am going to do the same thing that I did with my other bin and just put the cardboard shredded underneath of the food. I'm not going to wet this, I'm not going to add the bubble wrap, and check it next week. And if I do see that it is still too wet next week, I'm going to go to what I was doing this summer and either put the mosquito netting or the cheesecloth over the top instead of having the lid on there. to the first of the two Vermi bag totes. As I've mentioned before, these are my favorite type of composting systems. They allow for a good portion of the water to evaporate and liquid to evaporate from the bins while keeping the castings compacted, and I find these to be drier than the regular totes. When I move the mixture around, it does appear like on the top that the mixture is dry, but as you dig towards the bottom, the castings at the bottom are a good color, a good consistency. They are breaking down a lot. So I find for myself that it's important to make sure that the mixture is well fluffed so that none of the castings towards the bottom stay down there and become too wet. You do want to dig your hand down in there and try to bring the material up. And this is some of the material from the bottom, and if you notice, there's not a lot of pieces of cardboard and anything towards the bottom. It's just really the castings themselves. So I do get in there and really mix everything around. And what I'm finding in this case, what I'm actually looking for was hopefully some cocoons, just to see if the worms themselves are reproducing. And of course, when you're looking for cocoons, you don't find them. They can range in color from a bright yellow to a deep amber, and I didn't see any at all. So this bin, since the moisture content and the way the castings felt to me were in a good range, I decided not to add any cardboard to it or at all. I just added the food and the grit and then put the bubble wrap since it is on the drier side. And moving over to the last of the totes, this sister Vermi bag tote had its bubble wrap on it because this one seemed a little more wet than the sister bin. And in removing the sprouts from it, it has the same features. It looks drier on the top where the bubble wrap was, but once I move around and fluff up the material, the castings underneath are of great quality and consistency. I always pull the material or try to pull the material fully from the top and the bottom. And as I'm going through this bin, I'm noticing that either I put more worms in this one or that the colony is exploding because there are so many worms in this bin versus the other 3 bins that I went through. And you can see all the different sizes of worms that I have in here that are on my gloves and just in this, not really a worm ball, but just an area that I pulled up the worms from. So I'm really happy with everything with this bin. The worm health, the consistency of the castings, and I'm just going to give a feeding to this bin. No additional cardboard, no additional moisture. And if you're ever going away and want to provide something to the worms that's going to last them a while, apples are a great thing to give them because it takes them a while to break it down, and you want to put them face down so that the worms can get to them from the bottom part. And then once I feed it and cover it up, that's it for these bins. And we're up to the final tote, which is the Vermi Bag Mini, my only flow-through system. With the Vermi Bag Mini, this tends to be on the wetter side towards the top, and of course you can't reach all the way down to the bottom, so I'm hoping that it's drier at the bottom. I do have quite a few worms that are hanging out on the bubble wrap at the top, but none of them are up along the sides. Last time I checked this one, it had a good consistency at the top, And you can see here where it's drier on the sides, which just like the Vermibag totes, since they're made out of the same material, it's going to have a tendency to be drier. Another thing I noticed is how far the material came down from last week. It was much higher and it's compacted down quite a bit, which I hope is a good thing. In mixing up the material, as I go down the sides, again, the edges are usually dry. I expect them to be dry because they're right up against the material of the bin and they dry out the fastest. But the material just interior of that is very wet, or I shouldn't say is very wet. It has a good consistency, and the worms, I think because there's more space in this bin, the worms seem to be of a bigger size. So the health of this bin looks really good. It may look like I'm mixing up a lot, but again, I only dig down to about the depth of the middle of my palm and then turn everything over, just making sure that I get any dry spots or any places that haven't been mixed in really well. And based on what I'm feeling here, I do believe that this bin will need a little bit of moisture added to it, as well as the feedings moisture. So I'm going to add food, a little bit of water, but no cardboard this week. Just to make it easier for myself, going forward, I am going to use a harvesting schedule for the Vermibag Mini that matches either the Vermi totes or the regular totes. That way I don't forget to harvest this one, because I think I did go too long in the harvesting, and that's why the castings were more wet than they normally would be. But as far as updating the bins, they all look really good. Again, all I'm focusing on right now is maintaining the moisture levels in all of the bins, making sure that the worms are happy and that they don't dry out. So this updates everything for my worms this week. I hope you've enjoyed the content. Thanks for watching. And if you're not ready to go ahead and watch another video.